So, welcome to the podcast, Ed and Seth. So, if you guys each want to go through, maybe Seth first, give a brief intro, and then we'll let Ed.
Why don't we let Ed go first, and then
Let's let Ed go first. However you guys feel it's best.
We'll give you a little rundown of. There's just bunches of information that we have. We won't be able to cover it all, but let me introduce myself. First of all, Logan, thanks for having me. My name's Ed Wilson, and I have a different background from most UFO researchers today. Originally, I was a historian and rare book and document dealer, but that was only until I rediscovered what's the most important piece of NASA photography ever. It's called the Simpkinson NASA UFO. The only reason it survived is because NASA's original Space Task Group chief engineer, Scott Simpkinson, preserved it in his personal archive, where it sat untouched in the family basement since 1996. When I first saw it, one thing became obvious immediately. It's an indisputable flying saucer. It's a shocking image. So shocking that I began cross-checking it against NASA's own material. What I found was this: the lithograph wasn't an isolated event. The same object shows up again in NASA's official Gemini XI Hasselblad photographs and a Maurer photograph, and again in the never-before-seen 16,000 frame RCA D15 mission film I recovered from the National Archive. When you line all of them up, the secret lithograph, the public NASA photos, the hidden RCA footage, the object matches across all of them. Different angles and different lighting and different cameras, but the same craft. We're not dealing with a single frame. We're dealing with a documented sequence of events NASA never intended the public to see. This isn't folklore. This isn't something someone told somebody. This is forensic, archival, scientific evidence. We have NASA's astronaut voice transcripts reporting weird craft in real time. We have NASA's technical debriefings where the astronauts deny seeing any anomalies, except one, the exact anomaly that occurred during the D15 battery failure. We have a 6-minute communication gap, the classic signature marker in NASA's anomalous events, and we have a perfect, indisputable cloud pattern match between the lithograph and NASA's own frame S66-54585. Scientifically verifiable match that proves the lithograph originated from a real Gemini 11 photograph. Your own eyes won't lie to you. We have timestamp artifacts on the RCA film that indicate missing digital frames that should exist but don't. And this is incredible. You can read it for yourself, word for word, in NASA's own Johnson Space Center oral history, the testimony from NASA's legendary photographic director, Richard Underwood. In his official oral history interview, he states clearly that no one outside a small security-cleared group has ever seen a first-generation NASA photograph. Every image the public has seen, every image researchers have ever seen, every image you've ever seen, and Congress too, is from a third-generation negative. Make sure you understand what this means. It means we have never ever seen the original NASA negatives. So when you take all of this together, the lost lithograph, the matching Hasselblad photo, the 16,000 frames of hidden RCA footage, the astronaut transcripts, the cloud pattern verification, the missing timestamps, the National Archives recovery, the CIA MPIC duplication systems we now know were in operation, you have something NASA can no longer explain away. The craft in these frames are not lights. They are not lens flares. They are not reflections. They're structured objects, photographed by NASA across multiple camera systems in 1966. All 100% NASA imagery. Don't take my word for it. Follow the NASA trail and believe your own eyes. American public deserves transparency, and that's why I'm here. And with that, let me introduce my good friend and fellow researcher, Seth. Good to see you here today, Seth.
Good to see you, Logan. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Yeah. So I don't have quite the story that Ed has. In fact, his investigation sort of fell into my lap, and I've been helping him look into this photo for a while now, for a little while. And so Ed's written a couple books. He's done a lot of good research. I've compiled some of it and helped out where I can. But I think the best place to start this story is exactly with where you got the photo, Ed.
Oh, great. And as usual, you're right, Seth. Like I said in the beginning, originally I'm a rare book and document dealer. And that means what I do is I go to auctions where people aren't so familiar with history. and I'm able to obtain for very reasonable prices objects of history that most people would never know they're significant. And I rescue them from the dumpster, basically. I can't tell you, there's lots of items that over the last 25 years are in museums that would be in a dumpster if it weren't for me coming across them. So this one is the one that really put a seal on my career. What I did was there was an advertised auction up near Cleveland, Ohio. I think it was actually Wooster was the little town where the auction house was. It was advertised as the NASA collection of Emily Erdel. Well, as it turns out, no one had ever heard of Emily Erdel, although she's recognized in the NASA archives. But she does have a claim to fame. She's actually the very first female employee at Cape Canaveral. And this is in one of the books. You can see the newsletter that NASA put out on a weekly basis for all the employees down there. And they talk about how she had the honor of being the first female employee down there. But the reason that nobody recognized her was she was just listed as a secretary, although she had top secret clearance. During the Apollo 13 mission, when the mission blew up and they didn't know if they were going to get the astronauts home, everybody, I think, is probably familiar with the Apollo 13 movie, a great movie. She actually, Scott Simpkinson, the guy who really the archive comes from, he was on that mission too as the mission safety officer. And as the mission safety officer in the catalog that I got from the auction, he has the original mission failure statement from the desk of Scott Simpkinson talking about whether there's loss of life or not, and it's not filled in yet. But it was issued to everybody. When that emergency happened, he was there for the original Apollo, when the first Apollo burned up on the launch pad and killed the 3 astronauts. He was an integral part getting the safety procedures in place, which came into use during the Apollo 13 mission. So that's basically what I do, and why nobody realized who it was, because no one realized Emily Erdel was the live-in girlfriend of Scott Simpkinson for all those years. In the New York Times obituary, when he died in 1996, you can even see that she was listed as his longtime companion. He had been married previously. I think, Seth, didn't you and go down and interview his surviving daughter or something like that? I never did.
I met her. Yeah, she's pretty severely disabled. She isn't able to talk, and her caretaker didn't know anything about the photo, so that was a little bit of a dead end. But I did run into her. Yeah, his daughter.
Yeah, okay. Because I never had time to do that part of the investigation. It wasn't really my thing, genealogy. I couldn't track her down. But basically, he was married. That was his daughter. As I said, she was disabled. And when it came time
But that's not where his archive went. He passed his archive on to Emily Erdel.
Exactly, because I don't know whether he divorced his wife or not. He may not have divorced her. He was a Catholic. And back then in those days, kids, it was a little bit different. It was a lot less, and you could get communion if you were not divorced. But back in those days, it was just common policy that if you're a Roman Catholic and you get divorced, you can no longer take communion with the rest of the congregation. However, it's just an interesting structure. You might not be able to take communion if you're divorced, but if you're having an affair and living with another woman, you can still take communion. So I don't know exactly how devout a Catholic he was, but there were interesting times back there. Social mores were not the same that we have today. And then basically what I would call her is his wifey. So that's how it was advertised. When I went to it, I was phenomenally amazed. These auctions are archived on auctionzip.com, which is a format that's used for auctioneers all over the country and for auction collectors like myself, pickers, because you can go by zip code within 50, 100, 150 miles, even the whole country if you want to. And the auctioneer will put the actual photographs of some of the items to be auctioned off. A lot of them go 150, 200 pictures. Well, I started going through what he had advertised up there in Worcester, Ohio, and my God, there was a whole series of NASA
You were
photographs.
surprised to find that these were actually Scott Simpkinson's photos and not Emily's, right?
That was the amazing thing. Yes, that's why nobody came to compete so badly. Although I spent thousands of dollars on the 31 binders I bought, if it had been advertised, well, basically, what you're going to see in the first book is what I consider the historically best portion of the photographs. There were 31 black 3-ring binders included, and they were the actual archive of Scott Simpkinson and Emily Erdel because she was the secretary for, uh, for the NASA Space Task Group. The Space Task Group formed in 1958 after Sputnik was launched in the United States, was shown worldwide to be so far behind the Russians. And it was just an amazing time. I lived during it. And during the Cold War, the threat of nuclear annihilation was everywhere. They used to have drills in the schools when I was a kid where they would have the horn go off and say, duck and cover. In order to present yourself from the nuclear bomb that the Russians were supposed to be dropping kids, they would have us get underneath our desk and put our hands over our heads. So that was our civil defense against nuclear war back then. So things were very, very different than they are now. And that's what the amazing thing about this archive. This is from the guy who developed the NASA Space Task Group. Okay, he started working in 1943, which is during World War II. He graduated from college with a degree in mechanical engineering, and he went to work for the NACA, not NASA, but NACA, the National Aeronautics Commission on Aeronautics, or National, for exactly what it is. But NACA is the precursor to NASA. So he worked there in 1943, and eventually, initially, he was involved in the redesigning of military aircraft propellers. Now, back then, it was the Army Air Force, okay? It was not the Air Force then, it was the Army Air Force. So he worked at Lewis Field by Cleveland, which is now NASA's Lewis Center, okay? So you can see the line that ties all the way back. He worked there on the propellers eventually, and then, of course, he became a specialist in destructive testing, which is the same thing Elon Musk is doing right now. When you see his rockets go up and blow up in space and you hear them cheering, that's because destructive testing is the only way you can break through these frontiers. We don't expect these things to succeed. The phenomenal difficulty of all these things that we're attempting to do just prevents you from being successful the first time. And destructive testing is what Scott Simpkinson was the expert at. In fact, he went from the World War II aircraft propellers to Wallops Island, where he was instrumental in destructive testing of the V-2 rockets. So from 1943, very quickly he progressed. Of course, the war ended in 45 into military missile destructive testing. So he had super high clearances very, very early. And then, and as you do the research, as I've done, you find eventually that NACA was already, and the Army Air Corps was already heavily involved with the original CIA or OSS, whatever you call it. The ties between all these government agencies and the spy agencies and the spycraft involved in all this is very intricate, very detailed, and it's part of all these books. And you will notice when you look on the cover of the book, which I'll just hold up here briefly for you guys to take a pick at, you'll notice, there you go, that, I forgot what you'll notice a lot of things. First of all, guys, for those of you who haven't seen it yet, you see the UFO right there?
Let me pull it up for you.
Yeah, there you go.
Let's see if
Yeah. That's about all
share my screen
all the
works here.
images of it. At the end here, we'll talk about Seth's website. All the photographs that we've discussed, and we have bunches of them, are going to be available on Seth's website at the end. And you look at them for free. I'm like, there we go.
Can you see that?
That's it. So you talk about spycraft, and you notice at the top, you see the word unclassified. And you can read what it says. It says, and this is typical CIA subterfuge. The title says, strange object as seen during the Gemini 11 flight. Well, the National Photographic Interpretive Center had special language that they used so that all the CIA documents, which I've gone through, have very generic type of headings because you can pull them up and other people can see what they're about. Man, look at that. Isn't that amazing? You see the aura around the UFO? That's from 1966. I spent $5,000 to have this analyzed by Microtrace, a forensics laboratory, and they're world renowned because they do basically they do multi-million-dollar lawsuits, and they do photographic analysis. But they do all material analysis for these big money cases. I had them do. There's an 80-page report in the back of the book. We have 5 scientists who were kind enough to contribute to the first book. They did each one an independent analysis of the evidence that we had at the initial time, and they allowed me graciously to present it all in the scientific appendix, where you'll find it absolutely 100% untouched by me, their findings, their beliefs, and the outcome of all their experiments. But we have anyways from the Chicago evidence file. It's all consistent. Everything is consistent with the object being ink, paper, 80 pages of data, beautiful, wonderful images on the back. Here and there you go, guys. And this is the picture you got to see right there. That's from, can you guys hear me? I got my microphone. That's 1959. That is the original space task group that came from Lewis Field, Army Lewis Field, which is their Army Research Center. And if you see right in the center, the lovely young woman, that's Emily Ertl, and the kind of chubby guy that she's nestled up against is Scott Simpkins. That's from 1958. And in the background, this is key. Look at that. That is the very first Mercury space capsule ever built. And those are the guys from Cleveland who went down to Cape Canaveral to build. And that's just an amazing photograph right there. I'm really pleased to have that. That's part of the archive that I've maintained. As I said, then the photographs that you're going to see, the title of the book says there's over 150 of NASA's earliest photos. Many of them are one secret. There are photos inside this book, and they're all 9x11 photos. I've done the best I can to make this a beautiful, beautiful coffee table book, and it's historically accurate. One of the guys who contributed to the book and gave us a nice, I think, like a 20 to 40-page analysis of the Chilean UFO was Richard Haynes. Richard Haynes, the old retired guy, actually worked during the Gemini program as a psychologist for NASA, and he's the guy who founded NARCAP. Yeah, not Narcan either. NARCAP, which of course was one of the very first nationwide and international organizations that was trying to provide a place for pilots and other guys who couldn't report things because of the stigma involved with it, and that were dangerous to aeronautics. So NARCAP, Richard Haynes, he was kind enough to give me a wonderful, wonderful report that he allowed me to print in the back of the book. And you'll see it's a Chilean UFO caught by an amateur, and he shows exactly how you're supposed to do a scientific photographic analysis. He's so gracious to give this information out there. That's a lot of what this book is for, is out there, guys. You guys don't know it, but someone out there is going to be able to provide a great deal of help in researching UFOs. You don't know it yet, but I know that you're out there, and I know that you're listening, and it's called synchronicity. Someday when I'm dead and gone, you'll be there to take over, and you will find very, very valuable information. Just remember, I told you that, though. That's what synchronicity means.
This is true. Why don't we let Logan here ask a question or two, and then we can talk about some of the other interesting points.
Sure.
Well, I'll just start like in post. I'll throw in those photos you're trying to show there, Ed, so that the audience has a clear view of them. So that's not a problem. I'll just take notes as we roll on the specific photos, and then Seth and I can make that happen. So he can send me the photos. So were you a UFO, or maybe not even a UFO, but a NASA buff before you discovered these albums at the auction?
That's a good question. As I said, it's very difficult for younger people to realize just how primitive we were back then. When this mission occurred in 1966, I was 11 years old. And just as every a boy today has their spurt of interest when they're a kid, whether it's sports or whatever it is that stands out in their life, you become fascinated by it and enthralled. For us, it's unimaginable for you guys to realize with the scare of the Sputnik and the missile crisis and the Cold War and the threat of nuclear missiles landing on us at that time, it was absolutely a nationwide phenomenon that every launch by NASA was covered by television. And let me tell you, guys, you got to understand just how primitive we were back then. You'll see in these photographs of the book that very first capsule that you saw being built, they show it being hauled out for the launch, okay? And this is just interesting to me. And to give you an idea how primitive we were back then, the capsule was hauled on the back of not a pickup truck, a tow truck. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You see that beautiful capsule, that highest technology of the day on the most important rockets that were also doubled as ICBM intercontinental ballistic missile bases. You see it being hauled on a tow truck. Very, very interesting image to show you how primitive we were back then. And this is the interesting thing when you look at that photo, and you'll see it because it's so cool. All the photos are so cool in there. But the tow truck that's hauling it, kids, is a double screen, a double windshield. Okay, the windshield is split in half. You got a windshield on each side. Now, just so you know how primitive we were, this is going up into space. A guy's going to ride in that little tin can and be shot on a missile that 8 of these first 17 Mercury missiles blew up. That windshield is in 2 pieces because we didn't have the technology to make a large piece of safety glass. So back then, I mean, without safety glass, you hit a tree and you go through the windshield and you're just cut for ribbon. So they came up with safety glass, but we didn't have the technology to make that big piece. So there you have it. That's how primitive we were back then. Kids, let me tell you, these were different times. So yeah, I was enthralled by it. Every mission was on television. And back then, we only had 3 stations, black and white stations at that. Most people didn't have color TVs till, the later 60s, okay? Mm-hmm. And what you find was each launch was broadcast and televised live. Televised live. We could do that nationally because we had the capability to do it. But we didn't have satellites, kids. There was no internet. There was no telephone. You know what I did my math homework with? A slide rule. Right? Mm-hmm. There were no calculators. There was no internet. Today you can look down and get the news right off your phone. Back then they didn't have that, and that's an interesting thing. It's also in this book. Not only the 150 earliest NASA photos, but Emily, because there was no interface, you have the official Emily Ertl NASA archive of newspaper articles. So here's how news was taken care of back then. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have the phones. TVs only broadcast the news at 6 o'clock at night. They would have to fly film in and rush it in and get it onto the channels. So it was a primitive time. But what we did have was we had an established wire service that could go at the speed of light through the wires. And those wires provided newspapers with photographs and information up to the minute. So you may not, I know you're not aware of it because it doesn't happen anymore, but they used to have a thing called newspaper extras. And you might see an old movie, kids. I love the old movies. You'll see a little newsboy standing on the corner. He's holding a newspaper up. And he's going, extra, extra, read all about it. Such and such happened. Mm-hmm. That's what was going on back then during these space launches. That's how primitive we were. That's how news was disseminated. And you have in here there's about 150 NASA collected by her newspaper articles of the early Mercury mission. And one of them is extra, and this is a demonstration of how primitive we were. Also, the extra edition in there, as I think it's like one of the early Miami papers. John Glenn, in his first orbital flight that the United States ever successfully completed, there was only 3 orbits. An orbit takes about 90 minutes to get around the world once. It's escape velocity 17,000 miles per second. Or 17,000 miles per hour. That's going to give you a 90-minute orbit period. Still the same today as it was back then. He did 3 orbits. the newspaper that she collected has the first story, boom, successful launch, has a little picture of the Mercury capsule being launched on the Atlas, I believe at that time. The Redstone, I think, had been done away with, but the Atlas missile was there going up. Beautiful picture. Now, here's how primitive we were, and it's still the same today. We want to know the news when we can. So what happened was the same newspaper, inside there, she has the second edition, which is after the completion of the second orbit. So 120 minutes after the first edition showing the launch, they printed a whole new newspaper, okay? The second edition, and the headline says, "Launch 2 completed successfully."
Yeah.
This is how it was back then. So things are not like they are today, and that's what makes this history so phenomenal. And what the trail of all the evidence that we have here is very, very interesting to analyze, because you'll find mistakes made, you'll find evidence left uncovered, and this lithograph is one of the pieces of it that slipped through the crack.
So you stumble upon these binders at this auction. You're obviously growing up as a young child. You're into NASA and the space program. You probably noticed some significance with these binders right away, but you're probably still a skeptic and you don't really know what you have. So
of course, most of these photos are just regular old NASA prints of, launches and spacecraft and whatnot. But in the very back of one of the binders, we stumble across a photo of a UFO, which seems pretty damn out of place in the back of this otherwise very official, the inheritance of one of NASA's first engineers, and there's a big flying saucer in the back cover. It's a hell of a story. So at that point, he gets to investigating. And that's when the first book starts to get written. And I think one of the most interesting points. Let's see, what do I want to start with?
Well, probably the investigation and the voice transcripts, perhaps.
I'd say the transcripts. Yeah.
I think you have some of them you can even show. They're
yeah. I can pull them up.
What we have in these books is it's okay. The first book is over 650 pages, guys. And the book is over 650 pages. I've tried to document everything so that you can actually see it in the book. And so we start with the voice transcripts because you're right. When I first saw it, being a skeptic, I actually have the notes. I had to take there were 500 and I think there were like 564 photos and 31 black 3-ring binders, along with various documents also from that archive that belonged to Scott Simpkins. Now, this is how valuable those photos are and how rare. And that's why when you get this book, you're going to see things that nobody else will ever have. He was the guy who built the blockhouses. He was the guy who was there at McDonnell Douglas supervising the building of the Mercury capsule. He was the guy who had his finger on the launch button of the earliest mission. And what you find in these earliest photos, I kept that whole Mercury thing because I wasn't about to sell it. So the 564 photos, I sold about 230 of them, and you can see them too if you go to Heritage Auctions websites and you look up their sales and their space auctions, which of course they're the most famous space auctioneer in the world. All 230 of them you can find by searching just the Scott Simpkinson National Archive. Those 230 photos, guys, brought over $80,000. Okay, 230 photos, $80,000. And those are not the historically significant ones like the one that you have here in this book. No one will ever match this NASA archive in this book. So what you're getting in the photographs alone is something that every kid needs to see. You'll be fascinated by it. You'll look at all these.
I've got the transcripts pulled up here, Ed.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
so basically the whole time he goes online and he finds this. He looks up the transcripts and they're publicly available. The transcripts from the mission. What year did you get saying to each other?
What year did you first get this book, these binders from this auction? When did this happen?
March 2023.
Okay, so 2023. Now, your research obviously started within the material that you got from the auction.
Yes.
So,
as a guy who makes a living off it, what I had to do was I knew the value of basically photographs, which is why I bought all 31 binders. Being grown up during that time, I know by heart every single man mission from the earliest days. I knew the Mercury, followed by the Gemini, followed by the Apollo, and then onward into all the such and such missions. That was bread and butter for a young man at my age. So I knew all that was available.
So then your research beyond the binders to the verification process to verify what you had in the binders.
Exactly. When I took every number down, I had to write it down by hand because I'm an old guy. Wrote it down to be able to make a catalog for people to look at all the photographs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I came to the last page of the Gemini 11 binder, and there it was. It's 6 inches by 9 inches in a archival plastic sheath to protect it for all those years. And it's 6 by 9, and it's that NASA lithograph. When I saw that, there was no number to write down. All I could write down, it's just like the signal that Avi Loeb talked about recently about the wow signal.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it says. I didn't know what else to say while I was archiving it. And I looked at it and I saw it and I was stunned. And I put wow, W-O-W, 3 exclamation points, 3 underlines. So that's what struck me. So from that, I said, this can't be real. This can't be real. This can't be real. But I start somewhere. And I thought, what? And, just my own logic said, well, listen, I know they were not supposed to talk about UFOs if they saw them. That was supposed to be kept low because everybody was not supposed to know this information. And we didn't want panic and other things to happen in the world. So even if I was told not to talk about it, and I considered this to myself, and I'm sitting up in this tin can in outer space, so excited to see a world that no one had ever dreamed of at that time. And I saw this thing fly by me. I don't care what I'd been trained to do, I would have said something. So I said, you know what? I bet if I read the voice transcripts that maybe I can find evidence of that. And son of a gun, that's what I did. And I found 3 different instances where they describe seeing something unidentified. Okay? In those 3 transcripts, I said there were 12 different scientific missions that were performed on this. This was stuff that had to be done. We were in a race to get to the moon against the Soviet Union, and there was no guarantee that we were going to be the ones that won it. And that was something that the country did not want to have happen. So in that race, this Gemini 11 mission had 12 important scientific missions. The most primary important one was, for the first time ever, they launched a Gina capsule first, right? And that was their orbital target. And the whole purpose, and the real main number 1 mission, was to actually launch the Agena target up in space, so it's already orbiting. And then when they launched from Earth, within 1 orbit, they had to rendezvous successfully and hook up with that Agena capsule. Why? Because that rehearsal for the lunar hookup, where when they come up off the moon in the lunar lander, they only have 1 orbit in which they have to connect with the command module. And if they don't hook up in that 1 orbit, they're stranded in space forever. So that's the significance of this mission. And it was a success. And they did it. So that was the first number 1 task, to show that it could be done, to show they can get the orbital velocities maneuvered in such a way that they can do it within 1 orbit and have enough fuel left to get home. So that was important.
And this is in 1965, this mission, so it's not long
1966.
before. 66, a Gemini 11.
Yes.
So it's getting close to the first moon landing.
Yes. Well, then, right. So 66, and then, of course, 69 in July was then landing by Neil Armstrong. And, of course, Neil Armstrong, I think he was in the Gemini 11 mission, which people don't realize how close they came to dying during that. And that's why they made him the first man to land on the moon, because you can hear his co-pilot during that mission. When you read the actual footage, or not the actual footage, the actual voice transcripts of these missions, you will hear them say, there's no way that co-pilot said that he could have done it. He said, and Neil Armstrong was an artist when it came to flying. But again, what I followed was the voice transcripts. And we have the voice transcripts outlined in the books. You can read them for yourself. And the interesting thing you have to understand about history and how these things were handled, okay? First of all, you see that it says unclassified on the lithograph itself. It says unclassified there. And then we found the traces of unclassified from the fountain solution where the oxidation rates are different, and it left it so that when I did a 2200 dot per inch scan of the original lithograph for scientific validation, that's when it turned up, and you can read that there. That proves that the different oxidation levels showed that it's well over 60 years. So, but no, Seth, what I was trying to explain about the voice transcripts.
Right.
You find in the voice transcripts all these 3 instances where they're mentioning UFOs occur.
3, maybe even more. Never UFOs explicitly, but certainly they are expressing a lot of confusion about like things going by their window, like more than you'd expect from a couple trained astronauts.
Right,
Stuff
now
like
this-
they're saying. Sorry, go ahead.
Weird.
These were in the
There's
Simpkinson
something flashing
files.
by the window.
Yeah,
Weird.
no. So these weren't in the files themselves. These are publicly available online. You can just Google
Okay.
Gemini 11 transcripts, and you're going to
Yeah,
find
you can
these.
get that from that. But here's what you need to understand. Look at the front page of the cover of each of these. We have the mission.
They're saying
supposed to be breathing
there's
in
something
there.
real shiny right there. They're saying kind of weird, kind of weird. They're saying, what was that flashed and went by? They're
Yeah,
calling
what
it
flew by your
meteor.
window just now? Did you see it? Yes.
Saying, wow,
then-
look at that. That on our left.
What is
Saying, I think it's a reflected light, whatever. So another thing that's interesting that comes out of these transcripts and the mission report itself as well, which is publicly available, is the fact that a battery failed on board the mission. And there's also this 6-minute gap. So these two pieces kind of fit together where there's this 6-minute gap. And then just after the gap in the transcripts, right, where there's 6 minutes where they're not saying anything, the first thing that they say after they come back on is a question: is the tape recorder on? Which is kind of interesting because why wouldn't it be? And then I go back and we look at the Gemini 10 transcripts, and the Gemini 10 transcripts, the previous mission, actually contain a piece, a line where one of them say, don't forget to censor these when you get back down, or something like that.
Literally.
So it
yeah,
seems to
but
be a
that's-
tacit admission that they do censor the transcripts under
Mhm.
certain circumstances, which we're, kind of speculating could be what's going on here. If it's true that just after this, just around the time that this battery fails, and they're talking about this UFO, and maybe even the photograph, the Simpkinson photograph itself was taken, maybe they're saying some stuff that never made it out to the public transcripts. So all this is happening in close proximity to each other, and the battery failure is just another hallmark of UFO sightings, even here on Earth. So that's
all
kind of
these,
the
all these
that's
documents
the
that are used in the book.
that's
you
the
need to
transcript piece of
understand-
it.
So
You'll see
Seth,
right on the you'll see right on the front covers of these documents from 1966. They say secret for 12 years. Under penalty of law. There's all kinds of documentation on it, stamps, release stamps. This information was not released in 1966 or 1968 or 1970. It was 12 years before anyone could read this information. That's why this has not been as thoroughly explored as it is now, because no one but a historian has interest in stuff like that. I've read through multiple times the complete voice transcripts, 3 days of solid transcripts that I read through multiple times, trying to glean information and an understanding of what occurred there. That had been secret for 12 years. So I'm basically one of the first guys to go through with that fine tooth comb. Not the first, but one of them. And that's where I got a lot of this information from. So that was secret for 12 years. And then you wonder about perhaps why that says unclassified on there. Here's the truth. And Seth knows a little bit about this in the history of spycraft. When you hear David Grush talk about spycraft, when he's talking to the congressional subcommittees, and he's saying, well, we can have a discussion about spycraft, skiff. What he's talking about is basically how information is preserved secretly. And one of the things in the book, you can go to I've got a chapter on Gordon, let's see, what's his name? The astronaut, Gordon Cooper. Gordon Cooper, there's a wonderful video on YouTube. I've got it listed. It's got the address. You can get to it. And it marks right to the second in his video. And it's a phenomenal video. If you guys haven't seen it, go to Gordon Cooper, where he explains about the UFOs he saw when he was a fighter pilot in Germany. Okay, those he didn't see any in space, but he saw those ones in Germany. But he did see one in the airfield out in California. After he left the career at NASA, he was still involved with the U.S. military, and he was building a landing strip out in California in the desert. He was the command guy in charge of that. He had a crew of photographers out there as they were documenting the things that they were building there. I think, in particular, at this point, it was like an emergency stop barrier for these high-speed jets and stuff that were coming in for a landing, and they were showing how they were constructing it. Those photographers were out there in the field, and they called him up on the radio.
You're talking about Underwood?
No. I'm talking about Gordon Cooper. I'm talking about in the chapter on Gordon Cooper and back. It'll give you this is a YouTube video of Gordon Cooper talking. He talks about his UFO experiences, and this is what he says, and this is famous. You can hear it in other research papers too, where they talk about it. His film crew was out there, and they were filming already just the construction of the landing field. While they were filming, he says, they called him and said, "Hey, we just had a UFO land here in front of him." Boom. Now, he wasn't there. He didn't see it, but it was his film crew. And he says, they called him and asked what to do. And then he said, and then they told him, and we filmed it not leaving. We say they described how it landed. It had landing wheels, whatever, not wheels, but structural. And it took off, and they got it all on film. So he's telling you that he had that on film. He did not see the actual UFO, but because he was in command, he said, "Okay, come on in." And they said he didn't know what to do. Basically, there's no actual rule book for these guys to go by on, hey, how do I handle this? I'm part of the military, and I've got to get this information out back in the 1960s. So he had to go through all his chain of command until he finally talked to someone to tell him what to do. And their instructions were very explicit. And the explicit instructions were, under no circumstances, you have to immediately make and develop one roll of one negative. You must develop the original negatives, and then you have to wait there in your office with it until we come and send our courier to pick it up. But no more than that. Do not do anything other than develop that one roll of negatives. And we're getting the courier on their way now. And what he says in the interview, and you can hear him say, well, they didn't tell me to not look at it. And so he says, I held it up to the light and I looked at it. And he says, obvious, it's very, very easily seen. It's a flying saucer landed on that field. I saw the developed negative myself. And then he explains how they kept spy craft and how this information was kept secret. He talks about how the reason that Congress was surprised. Congress didn't know about the U-2 spy plane, okay? They didn't know about it until it got shot down, right? And you wonder how they kept it secret. He says, this is exactly how we kept it secret. He said, basically, Congress can't be. It's like giving money to a kid to go to the store and not expecting them to spend it on candy. They're going to blab their mouths. And this is how spycraft worked, because originally a secret document means it's a military classification. And the government of the United States was always set up that the military responded to civilian authority. So anything marked secret, classified, of anything was a military document. And the way the Constitution works, we are set up so that any congressman, or at least congressional oversight, allows them to see every single classified document. That's the history of spycraft. So that's why you see unclassified upon this lithograph.
Yeah. So on that note, interestingly,
there's a whole new classification that came about, and you can check it out yourself. It's SBU. Well, yeah,
sensitive but unclassified.
Sensitive, but
so on the lithograph that we saw, we could see that it was labeled as being unclassified, which is strange for something that seems this obviously covert. What's interesting is that Richard Underwood, he's the guy who was in charge of all NASA space photography. he actually flew Lockheed's U-2 bombers. Or no, they're spy planes. They weren't bombers.
Yeah.
He flew the U-2 planes. And the U-2 planes, they were discovered by Congress in the 60s to have been illegally concealed. So this program, this U-2 spy plane program that the CIA was running with Lockheed or whoever was running it, was not revealed to Congress, and that was unconstitutional to keep it hidden. And the way that they actually kept it hidden was to label the program as being sensitive but unclassified. And so all this comes out in court in the course of the 60s. But what's interesting is that Richard Underwood is the guy who's in charge of NASA space photography, who would have had the Gemini photos fall into his lap, the Simpkinson photo, and he flew those exact U-2 spy planes. So just another interesting series of connections that we made. Ed, real quick, before we continue, I'm going to have to call like 15 here.
Yeah.
Let's try and hit on so let's see, we got Underwood, we're going to want to hit on the D15 footage, and I think on the Hasselblad frame, the cloud pattern match. And then
I just got to ask.
Logan ask a closing question or two, and then we'll wrap it.
So Simpkinson's estate essentially had this at the auction. Now, how did he gain?
It was actually Ertles, but yeah.
Ertles. That was his partner, though. His girlfriend, living girlfriend.
Yeah.
So why wasn't this locked up, or is this all copies that he kept? Is there still the original documentation?
Personal archives from his office in Houston. Now, you have to understand, originally, the only space center was Cape Canaveral, okay? And those photographs he had an office there. So he had an office at Cape Canaveral. He had an office in Houston at the New Johnson Space Center. And he also had an office at McDonnell Douglas, where he was in charge of the quality control, which nobody understood good quality control necessary for these life and death launches back then. So he had to go there, and they had him sit there at McDonnell Douglas and ride ramrod over top of all the manufacturing procedures, because nobody was as stringent as he was with his destructive testing that he needed to do with the V2, etc. So, now I've kind of lost.
So he just had these documents at home, and he was allowed to take those home with no issues.
Well, yes, and this comes into the CIA documentation that's coming out in the last book. I have scoured these CIA reading room, and I've located a whole bunch. This book will be coming out next month very soon, and it's going to show all the exact CIA documents explaining basically that NASA did not have control over the images. The images were all developed by Underwood, and then from Underwood, the first images, the first generation, was sent to the National Photographic Interpretive Center. And there, it's ever since 1965, we have the actual document. They were given charge of the original NASA photos, and no photo was released back to NASA. NASA wasn't allowed to see them until the CIA, which is the founder of the MPIC, until they authorized it. The reason is because they did not know until 1965. Really, now they had the early satellites and stuff. They were all already doing spy missions. We have the documentation from the Corona missions where they would shoot the satellite up and then they would drop the film down with a parachute in those primitive days. We know that's basically, and they were already doing photographic analysis. But what they did, those were specialized cameras, very specialized cameras from the satellites that they were doing spy craft upon the Russians, looking at their ICBM missile sites.
Our intelligence agencies were deeply embedded within NASA at this time. And frankly, from the beginning, because I think once we realized, the way I see it, that we could put stuff into orbit and fly something over the motherland itself, right? Then the obvious first thought is put a camera on it and see what kind of intelligence we can gather. And I think that the space race was really in large part motivated by that objective and not by like going to the moon for any kind of, bold technological reasons. At any rate, to this end of being able to take videos from satellites, this Gemini 11 mission was particularly significant because it put the first TV camera ever into outer space. And so there's some footage that was recorded during what's known as the D-15 experiment that was performed on board the Gemini 11 mission. There's about 12 minutes of footage in total, taken at around 30 frames per second. And Ed is the first person to have laid eyes on this outside of the National Archives personnel and the people who recorded it. So as part of this investigation, he wanted to look into the footage that was captured by this experiment. So he got it from the National Archives and churned through all the frames himself. And within the footage, lo and behold, there are several frames which might raise an eyebrow if you were looking at them with a permissive eye. Then the brow of that eye might raise a little bit, because there seem to be strings of lights that can't necessarily. Now, one frame in particular is especially good. It's a string of lights that's curved in a shape that is really almost identical to the Simpkinson lithograph itself. So, someone who's not very skeptical would look at that alone and say, this confirms the authenticity of the Simpkinson lithograph, because there's no way this thing is a reflection or a lens flare or whatever. That's fine. There's also a couple other less compelling frames as well. So that was actually one of the highlights, I think, of the investigation, was finding what seems to be fairly strong corroborating evidence within the D-15 footage that an object like the NASA Simpkinson UFO might have been bugging these astronauts.
So Ed, how did you come to know that this footage existed? And is this footage available today for public?
Yeah, well, number one, Seth came into this investigation specifically because of his fantastic computer skills. When I got in touch with Color Lab from the National Archives, I did the research. First of all, when I read through all the voice transcripts time and time again, and I came up with 3 instances that seemed to be UFO related. They were all during the D-15 RCA night vision experimental camera, television camera experiment. And I also, reading through the mission reports, the mission reports like 350 some pages. They had to make copies of that totaled over 300,000 pages, all within 1 month, to be digested by all of the various manufacturing firms involved with it, and then analyzed before the next launch a month later. The scale of this operation is something else. But what was I trying to say, Seth?
Well, how did you learn about the footage? Obviously, from
when I read through the
transcripts.
transcripts, I realized that during the D-15, the 3-orbit D-15 experiment, which I knew, having read everything about the experiment, was a film experiment, there were 3 instances where they saw a UFO, and it said, or saw something unidentified. And I said, well, wait a minute. They're running this movie film right when they're talking about seeing these strange anomalies. And so I said, well, I wonder what this film is and where it is. So I got into the mission reports, and in the mission reports, I read the entire experiment, what it was, how many frames of film were taken, and how it worked. And with that, I did a search in the National Archives. Okay. And the National Archives came back and said, so we've located your D-15 film. So I used Color Lab. There were 3 labs that work with the National Archives. So if you want to get something from the National Archives, they will pull it, and then they'll send it to one of 3 laboratories. And then there, you negotiate with them and buy the copy that they're authorized to make for you. So,
Right. So
of
in
the 3
short,
labs, I took the one that was
the
the oldest lab, and it's called Color Lab. And the reason I went with them is because they were the oldest one. The other 2 were kind of like make work for lesser privileged people, but they were the oldest one. And this guy had all the records, and he says we don't have any record of anyone ever asking for this. So I do believe, at least as far as Color Lab, the first one is concerned, I'm the first person to ever request it. So
right.
having
So in
requested
short,
it, I told them I
the
wanted
experiment
it.
itself was documented
Yes, I
in
wanted
the
it
now
in the highest
declassified mission
definition
report,
film we
and
could
Ed
get.
requested it from the National Archives. And that footage is viewable if you go to what I can have you link in the description of this
Yes.
show, which is my YouTube video on the subject. There's a Google Drive repo that I made public that
That's got
has
all
some of
kinds
the
of
source materials from this whole investigation, as well as this D-15 footage and a high quality print scan of the lithograph itself.
Yes. You don't have to buy the books. They're expensive. I mean, this that the first book's very expensive, but like I said, it's a rare document, and Richard Haynes even says there'll never be another archive like it. But some of the photographs that are available are on the books themselves. That's the second book. Okay, kids, do you want to see what? There you go.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Those. Okay.
That in the center below the UFO is the string of lights from the D-15 footage I was talking about.
Okay.
And notice
Okay.
how it matches the lithograph. That's the other thing
It's
that a
hard to
lot of
make
people,
that
when
out
they
as a
saw the
lens flare.
lithograph, and yeah, well, a lot of things, when you see this lithograph and you look at it, those portholes, I'll call them portholes because that's not what they are, obviously, but those portholes are not equal, okay? And they're not lined up. And that's because they're not portholes, they're not windows. They have something to do with energy disbursement. And that's all I can guarantee to say, oh, there's a lot of research, but they're not equal. And a lot of people, because they assume that, hey, well, if I was going to draw a UFO, I would have all those portholes equal. It's not. And a lot of people says, well, that's a cheap imitation. And that's, but it was the, for me, that was some of the evidence that said, why would someone fabricate, obviously, a genuine NASA frame, S66545585, where the cloud pattern matches specifically. And in fact, right there. Here's what matches up.
Cloud pattern match. This would be the this would be the final
yes,
bit of
I've seen
evidence
this
that I
photo.
think we'd like to cover. Yes.
That's a big one used for debunking this whole thing, is that photo.
Yes. Precisely. Yeah, so that's really the loose end that we've yet to tie up. We don't know, was the photograph removed from that photo? Was that photo taken and there was a UFO originally in it that was scrubbed before even the second or third generation was stored by the intelligence agencies? Or was the photo added on in post? Now, if you're going to say that the photo was added on in post, it was painted on as a joke given to Simpkinson as a little present or whatever, then you've got to come to terms with the D-15 footage and the transcripts and such.
And you also have to come to terms.
This is possible.
You have to come to terms also with the prison sentence involved in doing that. Okay, that was.
Well, it may have been.
No.
I mean, it may have been.
No, that's classified document at that time. Okay, there's a prison sentence that would have been involved with making.
Would there?
Yes.
Even if it was just given to Simpkinson?
Yes. Because whoever made that document, that photograph at that time was a classified document. But we've got that coming up.
At any rate, where I stand on it is like, I don't know that the Simpkinson, I mean, it could well be that the Simpkinson photograph itself was a print, but if you take the UFO phenomenon seriously as a whole, then it's hard to imagine that like NASA wouldn't have known something about it. And that seems to be corroborated at least by the D-15 footage. If it was the case that, now, I mean, the whole thing just reeks of like there's no, and with so much within this space, there's no definitive answer, and there's never going to be, and that's the nature of the phenomenon. So I'm not sure if us looking into it has kind of, I don't know.
Well,
it's an open investigation.
Here's some things you can look at for yourself. Believe your own eyes, okay, kids?
Collected.
Here, look at this. You can see that did some analysis of the photo analysis of these patterns, had them matched. Obviously, there's difficulties with hallucination. Those are pictures from all the sources there. For instance, what's this one right here? There we go. See that? That's a D-15 footage there. Do you see the little blue flying saucer? There's more than lights to it. Do you see the outline of the flying saucer there? These are low quality images, okay? Those come from film that are very highly detailed, that I spent extra money to have the National Archives get down, and Seth went ahead and did that for them. So there's a D-15 view. Look at that. And there's a D-15 view. But here are some of the NASA photos that you can see for yourself that also occurred during the same time. This, is it up here? There it is. That's a Maurer photograph right there, okay? Mm-hmm. You can get online. You go to Arizona State University, March to the Moon, and all three missions, Gemini, or Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo, every photograph they claim they have. NASA no longer does this photographic work. They don't respond to it. they had the Arizona State University make the highest definition scans possible at that time of every single photo that was in their catalog. Now that's from the Maurer photo, okay? And you can see right there, looks just like a Frisbee, doesn't it? And you can make the outline of a saucer there, okay? That's in there, okay? That's in, and you can expand the film yourself in the March to the Moon thing. Underneath each one of those photographs too, you can magnify it and look at these things individually, but underneath is all the metadata of each. Underwood knew down to the second where every photograph was taken. All these Gemini photos have the exact second they were taken in the description, except for these 5 photos from which this was taken. Those 5 photos have 0 information in them. And then where's the other one I want to point out here too? Hey, now this is from one of those frames. That's from S66 54584. One frame before 54585, which is the matching cloud pattern. Okay, that's in there. You can magnify that and see that, and that is a reflect. And just by this is a detailed analysis through Fourier analysis. Fourier transforms were used to get that false color image of it. But you can get right on the NASA or on the March to the Moon website, and you can expand that, and you will see that light reflecting off a solid surface. That is from the sequence of 5 events. There's 5 important camera incidents in that NASA sequence, and that one 584 was taken within seconds of the confirmed cloud pattern match. 6 of them were all taken due to the movie that I had found that showed them being presented. They say that they are approaching the Agena capsule at 9 feet per second. They list exactly what the image shows, how far away they are from the Agena capsule. They don't give the times, but it's easy to see that if you take those at 9 feet per second, and one of them is listed at, the missing one's listed at 300 feet. But if one's listed at 300 feet and the next one's at 200 feet, and the NASA video says that we're approaching at 9 feet per second, well, you can see it was taken within 10 seconds. And that's the interval basically around all of them. They're maneuvering around that craft, and it takes those 6 photos. And right there, okay, that's the first one that is not scrubbed. But then back then, they didn't know what the amount of detail that you'd be able to get at one time. So this is modern forensics, that it's a very small image, but it's right there. That's 66 54584. Go to it.
Yes.
So
So
you'll see it right
Logan,
there.
at this point, I believe you know most of what we know. Naturally, Ed has more in his brain than you or I could ever fathom about this investigation. But these are the broad strokes. So, despite a debunker a skeptic could pretty easily point out that Hasselblad frame and say, "Look, there's no UFO in this original print," and they'd have a point. But a believer could just as easily point out some of the B-15 frames and say, "Look, there seems to be UFOs. There seems to be evidence outside of just this lithograph print." So,
well, and if I want to steel man that photo with the UFO in it, I could say, well, there's a camera that took more than one picture in that short period of time, and the UFO was in one of those pictures and not in the photo for another picture.
Yes.
Then you could also say, like when I look at that picture of that UFO, if someone in the 60s was to draw one, I almost pictured that's how they would draw it. So it's very much
a child. You would picture a child drawing it like that, and that's what's counterintuitive about it, and that's what people looked at it initially and said. But then when you see it in the D-15 and it's the exact same configuration, you realize these UFOs, those aren't windows. They are not equidistant. There's some kind of energy plasma type field going on there that's distorting it and making it look that way. And what you've captured is actually an energy process we don't understand. If anyone went to the trouble to make that, don't you think they would have the portals made equidistant and equal size?
well, not if their intention of making that photo was just to discredit the rest of the photos.
good one. You're the first person you're the first person.
You know, if
you're the
you
first
want
host.
to
You're the first podcast host who's raised that point.
If you
I thought
wanted
that
to
myself
discredit,
early on.
Yeah, if you wanted to discredit the rest of the operation and any other photos taken and the tape, the audio recording saying they're seeing something outside of a window, you've got like what looks to be like thermal images of another tube or something like that. Those could be maybe they were a legitimate UFO or unidentified object. But the other ones where it has the energy beams or the portholes, and it's like, well, we have to
All right,
discredit
guys,
this.
here, take a look at this. No, I'm glad to hear your conjecture, but that's easily, there are so many things that disprove that between the CIA documents and between the fact of how illegal that would be for anyone to make that. This is one of your D-15.
Well, it would have been the spy.
Well, I don't think they're
it would have been
concerned
the
with breaking the
intelligence
law.
agency.
Okay. Let's just look at this and let's just move on to something, because there are more important things that need to be out there. You can explore that skepticism after you've read over 600 pages of information. Okay.
Yes.
There's lots and that's only the first book. There are 2 more books following. So
there's a lot of information.
That's good. It's actually good. I'm all about exploring things. But look at this. This is an actual.
Of course, Ed, I think the point that he's making is that all of this could be true, and also the lithograph could be.
The lithograph could be an effort to discredit the fact that there
the
was
rest
a
of
UFO.
exactly what you're pointing out.
Well, okay. Well, there's lots to be said about it. That will come out, and you will see it in the CIA documentation, and you will see it in the chain of command. Those things will be presented in the next book. But here, look at this for right now. Look at the cover of this book here. That's the actual D-15 frame. It's very close to JPG 000515. There's the Earth. This is from that night vision camera experiment. And there's the UFO, and there's the UFO. But what you don't see is the timestamp that goes on it. That's actual NASA footage. I don't know if I've got a timestamp available, but the way that works.
It's tough to see when you're holding it up.
When you hit that button to record it, these signals on the D-15 camera ran for 270 minutes, and he was looking. It's like a radar screen, and it was because night vision. When it comes to night vision, you only have 45 minutes on the dark side of the world. Okay, and these spacecraft are also doing surreptitious surveys of targets. Okay, military targets. You want to know where a Russian missile base is, and you want to get some good film footage of it. Half the time you're in dark, so it makes it very hard to target and see what's going on to direct your cameras. Well, that's what the D-15 night vision camera was for. There's a little radar screen. Anyone who's ever piloted a boat, you put your face down in the screen and you run by the radar. Okay, so that camera was running an electromagnetic signal. It was a television camera, but while he was holding that and steering and doing the targeting with that, in his left hand, he had a clicker. And that clicker had a button on it, and that's where the D-15 film footage came from. It's 10 minutes of film, but there were 270 minutes that thing was running. So what his purpose was, anytime he saw something he didn't understand, and that's the way they described it, if you see something you don't understand, click the button, and we'll record it on film. That's where the D-15 film comes.
And I think it's indisputable that these astronauts saw much while they were up there, or at least a few things that they did not understand. So with that being said, it's quite the case. Do you have any final questions, Logan?
Yeah, no. What about the thought that the Simpkinson was involved in a deep psyop? And this was an elaborately constructed psyop for whatever reason that we may not understand. And this information was intentionally put out there to be found and distract from something else. I mean, many people say that the moon landing was fake.
Including the D-15, including all the circumstantial evidence.
Probably the fact that there was no record of this ever for 66 years.
If they are very forward-thinking.
It would have been.
The CIA is very forward-thinking, I would assume. Anyways, the way I imagine it is that if, like, within the 40s and 50s, suddenly the UFO phenomenon is starting to get some amount of attention, at least from Ruppelt and from the Air Force and from private pilots, then our fine intelligence establishment would probably have thought, well, eventually this is going to have to come out. It's not going to hold forever if we just say there's nothing going on, that there's nothing to all these unidentified sightings. So if that were the case, then they may have been planning this recent wave of disclosure for a very long time.
What are your thoughts on Buzz Aldrin and his reports kind of off the record that he may have seen something in space? I mean, you're probably very familiar with him and his missions and what he thinks.
Oh, Buzz Aldrin, yeah. Well, he didn't. I think there's actual voice transcripts of him looking out the window and saying, "Hey, what's that following us?" Right? Their actual voice transcript. Okay, and they explain it like, well, it makes this capsule or that kind of stuff. There's always valid alternatives offered, but they're not offered with any real scientific evidence. Okay, and what I'm trying to provide here, and what you'll find in just abundance in all these documents, are the actual documents that you can trace scientifically and analyze scientifically and provide some kind of evidence. So there are lens flares in there. Gee, Mark Braben did a wonderful analysis for me on one of those 5 missing frames, in which I think it's like a S6654587. In that one, it looks like there's a UFO up above it. And I looked at it and said, well, gee, that looks very similar to a UFO. What the heck is that? And he's a wonderful, wonderful graphic artist. Okay, he did work for Richard Nolan in his movies, I believe, and he has his own studio up in Cleveland. He's a really talented artist. But within 1 minute of me sending him the image, he was able, through analysis, to show that it's absolutely a reflection, not a reflection from the bright sunlight hitting the Agena and then transforming back to it. So, there's all kinds of modern analytic methods that can be used, and that's what I tried to utilize on these tasks. You can read the scientific documentation of all these craft and the comparisons that I have done. Now, that's not my forte, but I do have enough skill that I'm able to raise the question up and show rudimentary evidence through the use of artificial intelligence. And I'm pretty good at artificial intelligence. I'm aware of hallucinations and what problems they are. But I've also, I try and keep up and do the most reputable studies I can to reduce them to a level that at least you're getting some kind of evidence. So
it seems like in this case, maybe the most reputable evidence that's hardest to debunk is the actual voice transcripts, the battery failure, and the other photos.
I think it's pretty compelling. I'll cast my vote with the D15 footage, but between the two of them, it's hard to make a straightforward skeptical case, I think.
So Scott, how did you and Ed come to meet then? Where did you guys come together on this?
Seth.
How did this start?
I had it basically dropped in my lap by another associate of mine who was looking into who became interested in the UAP topic, went looking into it, and stumbled across Ed's book. And then I wound up getting a copy of Ed's book and reaching out to him, and here we are.
He's recognized when he's talking about Dr. Brown.
I am.
And he's recognized in this book. This is his analysis that he did for us. He's comparing the D15 footage, and he's comparing it to the lithograph to show the structural similarities of the light patterns and how, once you get a high definition image of what he's done there, you can see he's made an interesting comparison that's very hard to debunk. And he's a professor at Ohio State University, and Seth was involved with him there. The way I got in contact with him is my cousin is Dr. Diane Powell, who of course is a very famous researcher. I mean, she's
neuroscientist.
Yeah, neuroscientist. Yeah, she taught neuroscience at Harvard. She taught it.
This is what was interesting. She starred on the telepathy tapes, Kai Dickens' recent podcast regarding neurodivergent children and their alleged psionic abilities, which is a whole nother rabbit hole that we don't have to go down right now. But to anyone in the UAP crowd, the idea of psionics is not quite so far-fetched. So I think that it was following up on that particular lead that Dr. Brown stumbled across. Dr. Powell and her work on psionics.
She put me in touch with Dr. Brown, and Dr. Brown put me in touch with Seth, and it was the finest thing that happened was to be able to have a sex expertise add so much.
So it's been 2 years. You guys have been really diving into this verification, going through all the documents. So now where do you go with it? Do you feel like the research is complete and wrapped up, or are you guys still chasing leads on this story?
More than that, not just chasing leads, but have come across astounding stuff. What you're going to see here This book will be released in January. It's somewhat completed, other than the fact that I have to do it. This book delves deeply into, there you go, right there, guys. Those are CIA documents that corroborate how the CIA, okay, you can see the actual numbers there. Those reports you can get on at the CIA reading room. I've got more than those 10. Those 10 reports right there are the corroborating evidence to go back to the HT Autotech document that starts the creation of the National Photographic Interpretive Center was created by NASA in 1956. I went to the archives 56 through 58, and they explain exactly what it was used for. Number one, it was the first skiff. You hear skiff mentioned in all of these things. It was in Washington, D.C. It was the first skiff that people actually had to go there to see these secret images. But the important thing of those documents, and it's coming out in this new book, and it's going to be absolutely revolutionary. If you take a look at, stop, frame it, and look at those document numbers. I'm not going to give them to you here, but if you can find them, that's great. They're there. You can read yourself these amazing facts, and the amazing facts are this: just like Underwood said, nobody has ever seen anything but a third generation. Underwood, of course, was the U-2 spy, so he was well aware of what was going on. He developed every photograph, but from there, the very first master went to the National Photographic Interpretive Center. It's written out in these plain documents. There's 10 of them that corroborate that, and you can read it yourself. And they talk about how the documents are detailed. They even talk about how secret it is. They say, we don't want anyone to become aware that NASA is going through us. Okay? It's plainly spoken in the documents, and I have them. But it goes back to basically, we knew that they were doing photographic research with satellite images. In 1965, on the Gemini 5 mission, okay, during the Gemini 5 mission, they took some photos from the capsule of the Cape Canaveral launch facility. Okay, and basically, they were taking all kinds of photos, but this was more or less to show the guys at home, hey, look, here's what you guys look like from us up here in the space capsule. And they took a series of photographs there. They were with the Hasselblad 500 camera, okay, which was relatively new back then. Now, the military was using very advanced cameras on their satellites where they're spying on the Soviet Union, okay? But what they didn't realize at the time was just how good the Hasselblad cameras were, because the 1965 memo, the Gemini 5, shows where they made a montage of those pictures of Cape Canaveral, and the details that they were able to get from the handheld space cameras were mind-blowing and were absolutely critical to be withheld, because like they said, hey, this is a threat to national security. We could make an ICBM targeting map exactly from this montage we made from Gemini 5. And then I have all the documents showing where they take charge of the chain of command of all the photographs. From that point onward, 1965, the National Photographic Interpretive Center got first custody of the original NASA film. And they talk about how we don't want anyone to know that this is possible. And that's where that's where the lithographs were made too. I have the documents showing the Heidelberg lithograph press that they put in there. And then you have all the documents that they made, and they describe what is called as a sanitized briefing document. The Simpkinson lithograph is a CIA sanitized briefing document. I've got instances of where they talk about how many of them were made there. They talk about exactly what they were used for. You have certain people that have to be advised within the government of these incredible things, but you want to limit it very much, because you can't keep these secrets unless you do. And that's what they were in charge of. They made a sanitized briefing document. It got to the hands of the safety engineer for NASA, who was also a military back to 1943, a high classified military operative for the United States Army, Scott Simpkinson, and he's the safety engineer for all of the early NASA programs. and he has to, number one, he's called in on an advisory commission.
Mm-hmm.
So he's an advisory. And number two, he also has to be making decisions that can be relegated into changes in performance, mission, what to be expecting, and what to look out for the danger that might be established by, just like today. You hear these pilots today talking about, hey, this is dangerous. These things are flying up here around us. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it was the same way thing. That's why Scott Simpkinson, as the head of the safety, was the guy that had to be notified of that. He had to be aware of these threats. They made somewhere between maybe 5 to 8 of these lithographs, maybe. Okay. And they were used as a briefing document. The briefing document, the purpose of it, and you can read in these CIA documents, they'll tell you exactly what the briefing document is for. You hear them talking about, we have to degrade the image, but we still have to brief those people who need to know. We have to brief them with something that they can see and grasp, but that can be safely dispersed somewhere other than outside a skiff, because you will never be able to glean the military information from it that you would from the original photograph. The U-2 flights over Cuba, where they took pictures of the missile silos with those U-2 cameras, right? Went straight to the NPIC, National Photographic Interpretive Center, and those had to go to the president, and they had to go fast, just like these NASA photos had to be done fast. Within 30 days was the next launch. They got there fast, and they made these briefing documents lithographs. And we even had the name of the machines listed, the Heidelberg lithograph machines listed in there. We have them describing how they built the skiff up there and how many people come in. And we have the list of appointments where they went down to Redstone Rocket Center to do a briefing. And then we have the point where NASA personnel came up to the skiff to receive a briefing from the photo analyst. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So this whole chain of events is in CIA documents. So that's why, I want to, get into what's about to come out is going to solidify in a very dramatic way. What I just showed you, those CIA documents are going to be ignored. And they show directly that NASA did not have control. People at NASA, you think of all these oversight committee meetings that you've heard of, where the NASA guys get up and they say, well, we don't have any evidence of UFOs in these photos. They're not lying. What these CIA documents show you is that those images are redacted before NASA gets them. NASA did not have charge of them. It's indisputable in these documents. And it's indisputable. We've got documents where NASA is asking for a photo because they don't have custody of it. So you have them asking the National Photographic Interpretive Center for a copy of the photo. The documents are amazing. So we've got corroborative evidence that's coming out this month. That's going to blow your doors off, and it's going to blow everybody's doors off. This is a significant piece of evidence that's been strung together with genuine CIA documents that you can read for yourself, and it's going to highlight exactly what happened. So you have amazing things going on. You have Underwood verifying that nobody's ever seen more than a third generation negative print, right? Nobody. He says that. And then you have the CIA documents saying, and traces it and says, yeah, of course nobody's seen it. NASA didn't have access to it. We were in charge of what got released. So this is amazing stuff.
So where do you stand? I mean, you do a lot of research on the UFO itself. So where do you just stand on the extraterrestrials? Are they here? Have they always been here? Like, you must have personal opinion on the whole alien subject outside of just UFO sightings.
In my personal opinion, I mean, one of the most interesting books that I read, and I've read it a couple of times, and I just bought the first edition again, was Philip Corso's The Day After Roswell. Philip Corso, when you do the research on who he is a documented guy who was a presidential advisor, okay? He was giving presidential briefings all the time. He was a high-class engineer. He worked for the general who was in charge of the Foreign Technology Division. And that's what people, need to research who Corso was. You read all his fantastic advice, but like me, and the whole backside of his book is filled with CIA documents. Okay? He's like me. He documents stuff. So when I read through the book, it's interesting to read the stories, but you got to read through the actual CIA documents in the back of it. He's providing corroborative evidence of what he's saying. And also, one of the things that he mentions that leaves me thinking all the time is he talks about, he dispersed the technology that came from Roswell that his general gave to him and that he was giving briefings to the president. He dispersed it to Bell Laboratories. He dispersed it to McDonnell Douglas. He says that he dispersed the fiber optic, okay, and the night vision and stuff. And we know he dispersed the information on a Brazilian machine gun, which we stole and used in the U.S. military. These things, those are the things that can't be directly corroborated, but are in his story. Now, he provides a lot of evidence that what he's talking about is real. And he also talks about some of the things that we need to understand. And this is one of my favorite things from the book. He tells a story, and you have to realize that some people poo-poo him and say, well, they were doing all this research on fiber optics. The only problem I have with the book that he wrote is he writes it as if he's the first guy to disperse that information. No, there's a long history of research going back to Tesla, okay? Mm-hmm. We have all kinds of things going on in the scientific field, and he was not the first guy to do it. So when he writes the book, it's as if when he's dispersing the fiber optics to Bell Laboratories, okay, guess what? They already had fiber optics in the process, okay? They already had the theoretical framework for making that kind of stuff. But he writes it as if they didn't. That's incorrect. Of course, they were already working on it, but his disbursement of it allowed them to perfect these things. For instance, I remember during the Vietnam War, since I was in the war age when that thing was going on, they created a thing called the night vision rifle for the M16 rifle. The M16 rifle, they had a big circular eyeball, and that is what he says was directly gleaned from the eyelid of the alien that he says that he saw. Okay, and it was called the Starlight camera system, where you're able to see a Vietnamese soldier coming at you in the dark. These things, there's a lot of truth to it. But here's the point that I was going to make. He worked. You have to remember that things change over time. The Air Force did not exist. It was the Army Air Corps. Okay, so then when these things broke off into their own individual things, there's a lot of competition between the Army and the Air Force, and of course the CIA comes from what, the OSS. The world has not changed. Everybody in this world is in on a power grab. We have to. It's human nature. That's how we thrive and survive. We reach for power where we can get it. He talks about where he took this revolver out of his pistol while he was in the Pentagon office, and he had been out dispersing high technology to the industries that were working on his, what was it called, Foreign Technology Division? Okay, their job was back engineering this stuff. He was in charge of back engineering. He back engineered, like I said, the machine gun they stole from Brazil. But the point is, he was in the Pentagon. He had been followed, and this is serious business. These guys are living as soldiers, and soldiers are a life and death situation. He was on pork chop pill. The reason he was so loyal to the general that was the engineer in charge of him is because as a general on pork chop hill, a bloody battle in Korea, the general actually went to the front lines on that battle and was up there with the guys getting shot at. And, a role of leadership that made him famous throughout the
As it should be.
Yeah, as it should be. He was a great leader. And that's why Corso says, I promised him I would not disperse any of this information while he was alive. And the book came out upon his death. So, but Corso went into the guy's CIA office, and he knew that it was a CIA operative that was following him. And that's because there's competition between the Army and the CIA and the Air Force for power and money and funding. So what he did was he walked into the office of the CIA operative in the Pentagon itself, took his pistol out, slammed it on the table, and told him, if your man follows me again, you will not have him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he's a mealy looking little guy, big glasses, small in stature, small in frame, the perfect spy. He worked in Italy. He fought in battles and he killed people. Okay, so these are life and death, and that's how important it is. When you hear David
Life and death,
Gresham
indeed. It's
on his
really
life,
important. Listen, Logan, let me go ahead and answer your question briefly, or I'll just weigh in on it, and then I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to get going here.
Mm-hmm.
So, when it comes to the actual kind of, what people would call aliens, what people might call biological entities, the beings that people have cited over the past like century, little gray things. You've got some like insect type things. You've got a variety of different. You've even got like Pleiadians and stuff showing up in people's dreams. Whatever. You've got a variety of different morphologies, but that phenomenon in particular goes further back than Roswell and the modern manifestation of UFOs. And I don't know. Have you heard of the work of Jacques Vallée?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not in depth,
So-
but I'm familiar with his name. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, he's spoken at Seoul in recent years.
Mhm.
He's a huge, he's got a huge name. But I've been making my way through one of his books, and he's basically tracking this this phenomenon of people interacting with other beings that they don't necessarily understand. And the supposition is that the phenomenon really begins to transcend like our familiar concepts of reality at that point, when you start thinking about it outside of terms of physical craft or even physical beings. And this is where like you've got to wonder exactly how are they interfacing with us. Is it strictly on a physical, are we seeing physical beings here? That seems kind of unlikely, and that's where people start to lean towards a kind of interdimensional interpretation of some kind, where it's a little more like they're phasing in and out of our reality than it is like light is reflecting off of them, as we're familiar with it doing off of physical objects around us normally. So I guess when it comes to the question of other entities, people have seen them throughout history. The question is not whether that's true, but what are they? And personally, I believe that that's not even necessarily a question that can ever be answered in principle, simply because our relationship with the unknown and with uncertainty must remain existent, right? There has to be a degree of uncertainty. And at this point, we've discovered that this is true quantum physically, that there has to be some kind of uncertainty between different measurements of a system, different variables that you can detect. That is to say that, on the level of physical reality, uncertainty is baked in, right? The idea that you can't know everything at once is baked in to the fact that we're able to experience this physical world. So the idea that we're going to tear the lid off this thing and reveal the UAP phenomenon for what it is, it's not. It's like Vallée says, this is just the latest form, the latest manifestation of a phenomenon that is ingrained very deeply within our psyche and very deeply within our actual nature as physical beings. So that's my take. And and with that, I'm gonna have to call it.
Okay. Well, we'll wrap it up.
Okay, well, let me give you my last thought.
All right.
Here's what it is. And if you've heard tonight anything that sounds extraordinary, wait until you see it, okay? The real power of our investigation isn't just in the analysis, it's in the images themselves, the film, the photographs, the original NASA evidence that never meant to be public. The Simpkinson lithograph is just the beginning. The D-15 RCA footage from the National Archives, the 16,000 frames NASA never showed the public, will absolutely astound you, because what we're looking at just isn't a UFO case. It's part of humanity's enlightenment, a moment where we finally see what was always right in front of us. So if you want the full story, the documents, the science, the cloud patterns, the timestamps, the oral history testimony, if you want the complete investigation, it's in my books, and you actually have to see it for yourselves. Believe your own eyes. So please check out Seth's YouTube channel, Gemini XI UFO, and that's Gemini XI UFO. and see the actual NASA film for yourselves. The original footage is there. The evidence is there. And with that, it's been a real pleasure getting a chance to speak with everybody out there. Y'all have a great time, and peace out.
Well, peace out. Take care, and we'll talk to you maybe after that next book comes out.
Betcha.
All right. See you guys.
Good.